Now, there's been a lot of discussion on the show tonight about what the latest Newspoll means for the government. It's not good numbers. But what I really want to know is how reliable is this Newspoll, or rather any poll at all these days? Can anyone truly predict elections after what we've seen over the last decade? Well, here to help me answer that question is Joe Kelly. He's the Australian Canberra Bureau Chief. Joe, thank you for your time tonight. How does this Newspoll operate, and how does it come up with the figures that have got the government in such a flap?
Well, Cory, I think firstly, in terms of interpreting this Newspoll, there's a couple of things that we can definitively say for sure about this Newspoll, and it clearly, firstly, isn't good, but secondly, I think reflects a deterioration in the national mood, particularly over summer. It's not the sort of Newspoll Scott Morrison and the Coalition wanted to see, obviously, at the start of this year, just 4 months out from an election. But this deterioration in the national mood is clearly seeing a lot of frustration and anger being directed at the government, and that's clear in the figures. So those figures have shifted around a lot, and there are some ongoing trends which I think are very reliable. So you look at the primary vote, we can see that Labor's primary vote has gone up from 38 to 41, and there's been a drop in the coalition primary vote, 36 to 34. But if you go back sort of to November, that drop is more significant, sort of 37 to 34. You go back even to the middle of last year, the primary vote drop for the coalition has gone from 41 to 34. And if you go back even further to the sort of the depths of the pandemic back in the middle of 2020, there's been a 10-point drop in that coalition primary vote. So that's 44 to 34. So that's not good, and those shifts are statistically significant. We're also seeing, a bad trend for Morrison in terms of, his net satisfaction rating, net negative 19 versus Albanese on 0. Albanese is, come within a hair's breadth really of being, preferred Prime Minister. So on the whole, very bad Newspoll for Scott Morrison, as you say, and that's clearly linked to some of the issues we've seen over the summer. It's related to pandemic management. One of the supplementary questions to that Newspoll was who would be best placed to manage the pandemic, and we see Albanese in front, 33 to 32. That's got to be very worrying for Morrison, and clearly that's reflecting dissatisfaction at the lack of RAT tests, which we've seen over recent weeks, the supply chain disruptions, the lack of sort of essential goods on supermarket shelves, probably family holidays getting interrupted with kids getting COVID, etc. However, can you say on the back of this poll that Scott Morrison's definitively going to lose the next election? Is he going to get wiped out, be reduced to sort of 51, 50 seats in the House of Representatives? Will Albanese have a working majority of 20 seats? You can't say that on the back of this poll. It's too soon. We've still got sort of 4 months to go. We've got a federal budget due on March 29. The election campaign hasn't started. Last time around, the internal polling for the coalition gave them a big boost out of the budget before the 2019 poll. They'll be hoping to do the same thing. So I'll say that specifically about this Newspoll, but I do think, generally speaking, which is what you were alluding to before, there is an issue more broadly with polls, and what we've seen with polls, particularly since the 2019 election. It's not just a problem located here in Australia, but it's a global problem. I think the single biggest thing, the most important thing to restore confidence and trust in polls here in Australia is if they get the next election right. That's the test. So this is a big test for the major polling organisations. They need to get it right. It's important they get it right because they got it wrong last time. And it's more broadly important than that because polling is a significant part of the media landscape. The media wants to give the most informed picture to their audiences, their readerships about what the mood of the nation is, to take sort of the political temperature of the nation. But also, political polling is incredibly important for political organisations, for the major parties. They want to know what seats they need to shield, to protect, what seats they need to target. They need to allocate their resources, and they need to know what to spend their political capital on too, where to sell their messages. So if we get a mistake in the polls again, Cory, I think that's a problem. And then that brings into question a whole range of other things. It raises questions for how the media treats polls in the future. And it also raises broader questions about the political system and how the political parties use polling as well. So I think it's a big test.
It's a huge test, Joe, and we've pointed out they've failed before: Brexit, Trump, Morrison, and so on. But you can understand that, right? There must be this sense out there in the community where they go, I don't trust the institutions anymore. The education system's not working for us. The government's working against us. Our liberties have been curtailed. Whatever complaint they've got, why would I want to give a correct answer or tell what I really think to a big data firm that is going to be tracking them and recording what it is? And I think that this lack of trust and confidence doesn't give people the freedom or the willingness or the confidence to actually answer truthfully. So they just say what they think the other pollster wants to hear, or they refuse to answer. Is there a case there?
Well, I think that's a sort of a pernicious problem you're suggesting, Cory, but it raises challenges for the methodology that the pollsters use. So if you go back, the last federal election got the polls wrong. There was an inquiry into why that happened afterwards, and they were looking at a range of things about what went wrong. Was it simply that, on election day, a whole bunch of people sort of changed their minds and decided, I can't vote for Bill Shorten, I'm putting the other bloke in? And one of the issues that they found, which was significant, there was, and I'm talking in the broad generally about polling organisations generally, there was a trend where they tended to poll people who were more politically engaged, and that tended to focus on people with university qualifications, and it overlooked some key demographics. And some of those key demographics included people who didn't go to university, but people who'd done well for themselves. So self-made men and women, the self-made men and women of Australia, sometimes people who employed a lot of other people. It also found that high-income earners were sometimes overlooked. So the question will be whether the methodological changes that the pollsters have been making in these last few years actually work, whether they can sort of account for these new challenges which you have identified. And I think one of the other problems is cultural. We are living in a more highly polarised political environment where increasingly people are afraid to actually say what they feel or what they think because they don't think that it's in line with the zeitgeist of the day or is popular. So it's difficult. There are challenges, but it's important that the challenges are addressed and that if we are to use polls, that they're correct. And it's really to state a truism, Cory, but polls are only important or valuable if they are accurate. So that's why we've got to get this right.
Yeah, we certainly do. It'll be a big test. It's coming up in a few months. Joe Kelly from The Australian, thanks so much for your time tonight. I really appreciate it.